Die somewhere else, you worthless old hag. The scalding water hit my face like liquid fire, streaming down my wrinkled cheeks and soaking through my thin nightgown. Steam rose from my skin as I sat there in my wheelchair, the ceramic mug shattering against the hardwood floor behind me. The smell of chamomile tea mixed with the sharp scent of my own shock and pain. My daughter Sarah stood over me, her face twisted with a hatred that made my heart crack like old plaster. "You heard me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls of the house I had built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago. "Pack your bags and get out. This is my house now, and I'm sick of taking care of a burden like you." Her hands shook as she pointed toward the door, her wedding ring catching the morning light that streamed through the windows I had hung myself when she was just a baby. The hot water had already started to cool on my skin, but I could feel the red welts forming across my cheek and neck. My arthritic fingers gripped the arms of my wheelchair, the metal cold against my palms. I should have been crying. I should have been begging. Instead, I felt something else entirely, a cold, calculating calm that settled over me like fresh snow. I had spent 37 years as a real estate attorney, and I recognized a tactical error when I saw one. "Sarah," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the burning sensation across my face, "you might want to reconsider that request." I reached into the pocket of my robe and felt the familiar weight of the folded papers I always kept there. The deed. The will. The trust documents. All still in my name just as they had been for 4 decades. My daughter's eyes narrowed, but I saw something flicker there, the first hint of uncertainty. She had no idea what she had just started. But she was about to learn that throwing hot water on a woman who had spent her entire career protecting people's property rights was the biggest mistake of her greedy little life. I smiled then, just a small curve of my lips, and watched her face go pale. The game was about to begin, and I had been playing it much longer than she had. 3 hours after Sarah threw that water on me, I sat in my bedroom with the door locked, carefully applying aloe vera to the burns on my face. The mirror showed an old woman with silver hair and determined eyes, the same woman who had passed the bar exam on her first try in 1987. The same woman who had never lost a property dispute case in 37 years of practice. My fingers, still steady despite the arthritis, smoothed the cool gel across my skin while my mind worked through the problem like I was preparing for trial. Sarah thought she was dealing with a helpless invalid. She had no idea that her burden of a mother had spent the last 6 months quietly transferring assets, updating legal documents, and preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. I had seen the signs, the way she looked at my jewelry, how she measured rooms when she thought I wasn't watching, the phone calls she made to contractors about renovation estimates. A woman doesn't spend 4 decades in real estate law without learning to read people's intentions. The house around me told the story of my real life, not the diminished version Sarah wanted to believe. I had bought this land in 1983 with money I earned representing families in property disputes. Every beam, every tile, every fixture had been chosen by me and paid for with my own earnings. The custom-built wheelchair ramp hadn't been installed because I was weak, it was there because I was practical. When the diagnosis came 2 years ago, I had adapted, not surrendered. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my former law partner who still handled my personal affairs. "Documents are ready," it read. "Whenever you give the word." I smiled and typed back, "Not yet. Let her dig deeper first." The beauty of my plan was that it required Sarah to expose her true intentions completely. Every cruel word, every demand, every assumption she made was another nail in the coffin of her inheritance dreams. I wheeled myself to the window and looked down at the garden I had planted 30 years ago. The oak trees I had nursed from saplings now towered over the property line, their roots deep and strong. Sarah saw only a frail old woman in a wheelchair. But roots that deep don't break easily, and she was about to learn that the apple had fallen very, very far from this particular tree. "I've already called Sunset Manor," Sarah announced the next morning, dropping a brochure on my breakfast table like a court summons. "They have an opening next week. I've told them you'll take it." She stood with her arms crossed, wearing the same satisfied smirk she'd had as a child when she thought she'd gotten away with something. The brochure showed smiling elderly people in a sterile facility that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. My oatmeal had gone cold while I listened to her speech about what's best for everyone. The morning sun slanted through the dining room windows, illuminating the family photos on the mantelpiece, pictures of birthdays, graduations, holidays, all the moments when I thought I was raising a daughter who loved me. Now those same photos seem to mock me with their false promises of loyalty and care. The house needs too much work for someone like you, Sarah continued, warming to her subject. The stairs are dangerous, the garden is too much to maintain, and frankly, Mom, you're just not capable of living independently anymore. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to convince me that surrender was my only option. But I heard something else in her voice, desperation. She needed me to agree to sign papers to make this easy for her. I set down my spoon and looked at her directly. Sarah, sweetheart, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About this being your house now. My voice was soft, almost thoughtful. I'm curious, when exactly did the ownership transfer occur? I watched her face carefully, the way I used to watch opposing counsel when they realized they had made a critical error in their argument. What do you mean? She snapped, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice. You can't take care of this place anymore. I'm your only child. It's obvious that I should inherit everything now, while I can actually use it. She gestured around the room as if she were already measuring it for new furniture. But I had heard the key word, inherit. She thought this was about inheritance. She had no idea this was about ownership, and ownership was a game I had been winning for 40 years. That afternoon, while Sarah thought I was napping, I positioned my wheelchair outside her old bedroom door and listened to her phone conversation. The walls in this house were thick, I had built them that way for privacy, but Sarah had always been a loud talker when she was excited. What I heard made my blood run cold in a way that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through the windows. No, Mom doesn't suspect anything, she was saying. The conservatorship papers should be finalized by next week. Once I'm her legal guardian, I can sell the house immediately. Yes, I know she seems competent now, but Dr. Martinez said her condition will deteriorate rapidly. We just need to accelerate the timeline a little. The sound of papers rustling came through the door, followed by Sarah's triumphant laugh. Trust me, by the time she realizes what's happening, she'll be in no position to fight it. My hands gripped the wheelchair arms so tightly my knuckles went white. A conservatorship. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could control my assets. I had seen this happen to other elderly people, children who convinced courts that their parents could no longer make decisions, then systematically stripped away their independence and wealth. It was legal theft, wrapped in the language of caring and protection. The conversation continued, and I learned about Dr. Martinez, Sarah's friend from college who now worked in geriatric psychiatry. About the lawyer she had hired who specialized in difficult family situations. About her plans to put the house on the market before Christmas so she could start fresh somewhere new. Every detail was calculated, every step planned with the kind of precision I would have admired if it weren't being used against me. I wheeled myself back to my room as quietly as possible, my mind already working through the legal implications. A conservatorship required evidence of mental incapacity, medical testimony, and court approval. But Sarah had clearly been planning this for months, maybe years. She had positioned herself as my primary caregiver, documented my physical limitations, and was now ready to claim that age and illness had made me incompetent to manage my own affairs. The brilliant thing about her plan was that it would work, if I really were the helpless old woman she believed me to be. But I wasn't helpless, and I certainly wasn't incompetent. I was angry. And an angry woman with 40 years of legal experience was a dangerous thing indeed. Sarah wanted to play games with conservatorship and guardianships? Fine. But she was about to learn that she had challenged the wrong attorney to a legal battle. The next morning, I called my doctor under the pretense of scheduling a routine checkup. Dr. Williams had been my physician for 15 years and knew me well enough to understand immediately when I explained that I needed comprehensive cognitive testing for peace of mind. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in his office taking every mental acuity test he could administer, from memory assessments to complex problem-solving exercises. Margaret, your cognitive function is absolutely normal for someone your age, Dr. Williams said as he reviewed the results. In fact, your scores are above average in several categories. If someone is suggesting you need a conservatorship, they're either misinformed or... He paused, his face grave. Are you in some kind of trouble? I explained Sarah's plan, watching his expression shift from concern to outrage. By the time I left his office, I had a complete neurological evaluation and Dr. Williams promised to testify on my behalf if needed. Marcus met me for lunch at our old restaurant downtown, the same place where we used to discuss cases when we were partners. He slid a thick folder across the table with the satisfied smile of a man who had just executed a perfect legal maneuver. "Everything you requested," he said. "Asset transfers, trust documentation, and a few surprises your daughter won't see coming." I opened the folder and felt my heart warm at the sight of familiar legal documents, each one a small victory in the war Sarah had started. The most important document was the irrevocable trust one had established 6 months ago, transferring the house and most of my assets to an entity that Sarah couldn't touch even with a conservatorship. The second was a comprehensive medical evaluation from 3 different doctors, all confirming my mental competency. The third was something that made me smile despite everything, a restraining order, pre-prepared and ready to file the moment Sarah made another threatening move. "There's more," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling with the same mischief I remembered from our courtroom days. "I've been doing some research on Dr. Martinez. Turns out he's had his license suspended twice for providing questionable evaluations in conservatorship cases. Any testimony from him won't just be dismissed, it could result in criminal charges for fraud." I felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. That evening I sat in my garden as the sun set behind the oak trees, reviewing every document in the folder. Sarah thought she was hunting a wounded deer, but she had actually cornered a wolf. Tomorrow she would learn the difference. I had spent 40 years protecting people's property rights, and I wasn't about to stop now, especially when the property was my own and the threat was coming from inside my own family. Sarah burst into my room the next morning without knocking, her face flushed with excitement. "I have wonderful news, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Dr. Martinez can see you this afternoon for a consultation. He specializes in helping families like ours navigate difficult transitions." She held a clipboard with papers that I was clearly expected to sign without reading. The trap was finally being sprung, and she thought she was the hunter. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear," I replied, keeping my voice mild and confused. "But I'm feeling quite well today. Perhaps we could postpone?" I watched her face carefully, noting the flash of irritation she tried to hide. She needed me to appear cooperative but declining, the perfect setup for a competency evaluation that would declare me unable to make my own medical decisions. "Mom, you've been having so many memory problems lately," Sarah said, her tone becoming sharper. "Just yesterday you couldn't remember where you put your reading glasses." She gestured to the nightstand where my glasses sat in plain sight, exactly where I always kept them. It was a clumsy lie, but I realized she was probably planning to tell Dr. Martinez about all sorts of incidents that had never happened. Building a case, one false claim at a time. The phone rang then, interrupting her performance. Sarah answered it with growing agitation, her voice rising with each exchange. "What do you mean the house isn't in her name anymore?" She snapped into the receiver. "I'm looking at property records from last month that clearly show." "What trust? When was this done?" I smiled to myself as I listened to her conversation with what was obviously the real estate agent she had secretly contacted about selling my house. When she hung up, her face was white with fury. "What did you do?" she demanded, turning on me with an expression I had never seen before, pure, undisguised hatred mixed with panic. "The house has been transferred to some trust." "When did this happen? What lawyer did you use?" Her carefully constructed plan was unraveling, and she knew it. But she still thought this was about money and property. She had no idea that this was about something much more fundamental: respect, dignity, and the right to live without fear in my own home. "Sarah," I said gently, "perhaps we should discuss this after you've calmed down. And maybe you should cancel that appointment with Dr. Martinez. I have a feeling I won't be needing his particular services after all." The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. The student was about to get a very expensive education from the teacher. For the next 3 days I played my part perfectly. I let Sarah see me struggle with simple tasks, asked confused questions about things I knew perfectly well, and generally behaved like exactly the kind of person who might need a conservatorship. Every stumble was calculated, every moment of apparent confusion carefully choreographed. I had learned long ago that the best legal strategies often required patience and perfect timing. Sarah's desperation grew more obvious each day. She brought Dr. Martinez to the house for an informal consultation, but I made sure to be having one of my good days when he arrived. I answered his questions clearly and competently, discussed current events with accuracy, and even solved a complex math problem he posed. His evaluation would show normal cognitive function, making any later claims of incompetence impossible to substantiate. "I don't understand what Sarah is worried about," I told him with genuine confusion. "I feel quite sharp most days. Perhaps she's been under stress." Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable throughout the visit, especially when I casually mentioned that I had been reviewing my legal documents recently and found everything to be in perfect order. A man with his history of questionable evaluations recognized a legal landmine when he saw one. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence of Sarah's true intentions. I recorded our conversations, perfectly legal in our state with single-party consent, documented her threats and demands, and built a comprehensive case that would prove her attempt at conservatorship was motivated by greed rather than concern. Marcus helped me establish a paper trail that would stand up in any court, showing clearly that I was the victim of financial elder abuse, not a woman who needed protection from her own decisions. The most satisfying part was watching Sarah's growing panic as each of her plans fell apart. The house couldn't be sold because it was in an irrevocable trust. Dr. Martinez refused to provide the evaluation she needed. The nursing home placement required my voluntary agreement, which I politely declined. Every door she tried to open led to another locked room, and she was finally beginning to realize that her helpless old mother might not be as helpless as she appeared. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand completely. Not yet. Sarah needed to go all the way to show her true colors so completely that there would be no doubt about her intentions. I had learned in 40 years of legal practice that the most decisive victories came when you let your opponent defeat themselves. And Sarah was doing exactly that, one desperate move at a time. Sarah's final gambit came on a Tuesday morning when she arrived with 2 men I didn't recognize and a stack of legal papers. "Mom, these gentlemen are here to help us with your transition to Sunset Manor," she announced with the kind of forced cheer that fooled no one. "I've taken the liberty of handling all the arrangements. You just need to sign a few papers and we can get you settled in your new home today." The taller man introduced himself as an attorney, though something about his manner suggested he specialized in the kind of law that operated in gray areas. The second man claimed to be from the moving company, but his eyes kept scanning my jewelry and artwork with the practiced assessment of someone who knew valuable items when he saw them. This wasn't a transition, it was a coordinated theft, and Sarah was orchestrating it with breathtaking audacity. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice carrying the quiet authority I had used in courtrooms for decades. "I haven't agreed to move anywhere, and I certainly haven't authorized anyone to pack my belongings." I looked directly at the so-called attorney. "Sir, may I see your bar certification and a copy of the court order authorizing this action?" His face went pale, confirming what I already suspected. This was either a fraud or such a shoddy legal operation that it would collapse under the slightest scrutiny. Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. "Stop playing games," she screamed. "You're a sick old woman who can't take care of herself. I'm trying to help you." But her eyes were fixed on the antique ring on my finger, the same ring she had been coveting since childhood. This wasn't about my welfare, it was about getting her hands on everything I owned while I was still alive to sign it over. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, "I think you should leave now, before this situation becomes legally problematic for everyone involved." I reached for the phone on my side table, and the fake attorney was out the door before I could dial. The moving man followed, leaving Sarah alone with me and the wreckage of her final desperate scheme. The game was over, but she didn't know it yet. Sarah stood there breathing hard, her face flushed with rage and panic. "You can't stop me," she whispered. "I'm your daughter. I deserve this house. I deserve everything you have after what I've sacrificed to take care of you." And there it was, the truth she had been hiding behind all the talk of concern and caring. She felt entitled to my life's work, and she was willing to destroy me to get it. Now I could act with a completely clear conscience. I pressed the button on my phone that speed-dialed Marcus, and he answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said simply. Within 30 minutes, my living room was filled with people Sarah had never expected to see. Marcus with a briefcase full of legal documents, Officer Rodriguez from the local police department, and Dr. Williams with a comprehensive medical file that would put an end to any questions about my mental capacity. "Sarah Christine Mitchell," Officer Rodriguez said formally, "you're being served with a restraining order requiring you to stay at least 500 feet away from this property and its owner." Sarah's face went white as she realized that her helpless mother had somehow assembled a legal team and law enforcement support. Additionally, you're being notified that charges may be filed for attempted financial elder abuse and fraud. Marcus opened his briefcase with the satisfied smile of a man who had just won a case that everyone thought was unwinnable. Sarah, your mother has asked me to explain the current legal situation. First, the house has been in an irrevocable trust for 6 months, with your mother as the sole beneficiary during her lifetime. You have no claim to this property now or in the future. He pulled out document after document, each one another nail in the coffin of her schemes. Second, we have recordings of your conversations about forcing a conservatorship, video evidence of your assault with hot water, and testimony from multiple witnesses about your threats and intimidation. Sarah's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair as the full scope of her situation became clear. Third, your mother has been medically evaluated by 3 independent physicians, all of whom confirm her complete mental competency. But Marcus wasn't finished. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, your mother's will has been updated. Due to your attempted financial abuse, you have been completely removed as a beneficiary. Her estate will go entirely to the Domestic Violence Prevention Foundation, specifically to help elderly abuse victims. The look on Sarah's face was worth 40 years of legal fees. I had been silent through Marcus's presentation, but now I spoke for the first time since the others arrived. Sarah, you said I should die somewhere else and take the roof with me. Well, darling, I'm not dying anytime soon. But you're right about the roof, it's mine and it's staying with me. You, however, are leaving. And you're never coming back. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward to escort her out, but I held up my hand. Sarah, you have 5 minutes to take whatever personal belongings you brought with you today. Everything else stays with the house. Everything. 6 months later, I sit in my garden watching the spring flowers bloom, flowers I planted myself last fall after Sarah was gone. The house feels peaceful now, filled with the kind of quiet that comes from safety rather than fear. My wheelchair moves easily along the paths I've had installed throughout the property, and I've discovered that independence looks different than I thought it would, but it's still independence. Marcus stops by every week, partly for business but mostly because we've rekindled the friendship that made us such good partners for all those years. He's helping me establish a foundation that will use my estate to help other elderly people facing abuse from their own families. It turns out that my story isn't unique. Adult children stealing from aging parents is more common than anyone wants to admit. But my legal background and financial resources mean I can do something about it. The restraining order against Sarah remains in effect, though Officer Rodriguez tells me she's moved 3 states away and hasn't attempted any contact. Sometimes I wonder if she's learned anything from what happened, if she understands that her greed cost her not just an inheritance but a relationship with her only parent. But mostly I don't think about her at all. I've built a new life that doesn't include people who would throw hot water on someone they claim to love. Dr. Williams continues to marvel at my cognitive test scores, which have actually improved since the stress of living with Sarah's threats was removed. You're sharper now than you were a year ago, he told me during my last visit. It's amazing what happens when your brain isn't constantly processing fear and anxiety. I could have told him that. I've seen clients blossom after removing toxic family members from their lives. The oak trees I planted 30 years ago are bigger now, their branches reaching toward the sky with the same determination I feel every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by my own choices. Sarah thought she could uproot me like a weed, but she discovered too late that some things grow too deep and strong to be easily destroyed. The house that love built became the house that revenge protected, and now it's simply the house where I live exactly as I choose, for as long as I choose. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest victory of all.